power to override good governance and good judgment. It was abundantly clear on that now infamous leaked audio tape that Martinez wanted to punish and tarnish Ridley Thomas. And she did, but she ruined herself in the process. Big Mama always said, God don't like ugly and he ain't fond of cute. Once Neri Martinez's toxic leadership was no more, the council quickly and correctly moved to resolve an injustice born in part by their own rush to judgment and abdication of responsibility in performing due diligence. Their settlement action this week starts the process of restoring honor and trust. In March, Ridley Thomas will finally have his day in court and a chance to restore his good name. For KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Tavis Smiley. We welcome your comments. Live from Leimert Park, USA, I'm Tavis Smiley, and you're listening to KBLA Talk 1580. So glad to see you and me back in stride again. Our phone number, 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. All of our socials can be found at KBLA 1580. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, everything at KBLA 1580. Let me invite you, also, to download our app at KBLA 1580. Download the app and take us with you anywhere in the world and listen to us in real time, but only by downloading the app right now at KBLA 1580. Should you miss us any day in real time, check out the podcast of our program by going to the app, the website, Anchor, Spotify, Apple, so many places to get the podcast of this program and listen at your leisure should you miss us any day in real time. But I am delighted to have you along live with us today for the next 3 hours. You can also watch the live stream of this program by tapping the KBLA TV icon on our app or by going to our YouTube channel. Let me also invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. Another good show on tap for you today. In our second hour, why does black consciousness pose such a threat to racist power struggles in the struggle for dignity and freedom? How do black folk use the critical powers of creativity to dismantle racism and imagine a world where black existence is possible? A conversation with one of the great thinkers of our time, professor and head of the philosophy department at UConn, Dr. Lewis Gordon, joins us today in hour two. In our third hour, two conversations.
I know you want to leave me, but I refuse to let you go. If I have to beg, plead for your sympathy, I don't mind, 'cause you mean that much to me. Ain't too proud to beg, and you know it. Please don't leave me, girl. Ain't too proud to plead.
We will commence hour three in conversation with actor Marcus Paul James, one of the stars of the smash hit Broadway musical, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, The Life and Times of the Temptations. The musical follows the Temptations' extraordinary journey from the streets of Detroit to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. With their signature dance moves and silky smooth harmonies, they rose to the top of the charts, creating an amazing 42 top 10 hits, with 14 reaching number one. I ain't mad at the Temps. Actor Marcus Paul James joins us on the top side of hour three. On the B side of hour three, singer, songwriter, and founder of the classic R&B group Club Nouveau, Jay King, joins us on the backside of Hour 3, ahead of this weekend's huge KBLA block party for LA Mayor-elect Karen Bass, where Club Nouveau will be performing along with Guapole and Brian McKnight. Jay King of Club Nouveau joins us on the B-side of Hour 3. But in this first hour today, a conversation about the recent rise in crime, particularly gun violence, and why this current spike isn't necessarily a mystery. Moreover, our guest in this hour believes that these short-term trends can sometimes distract us from the question of how American cities got to this point in the first place and how they can move toward a sustained period of low violence. Patrick Sharkey is a professor of sociology and public affairs at the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. I am pleased to welcome him to this program. Professor Sharkey, how are you today, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you on. Thank you for the time. Glad we got an hour. A lot to talk about in this hour. I said a moment ago that this recent crime spike is no mystery. Give me the backstory for why we should not be surprised in this particular moment that we're seeing this spike in crime, and we'll jump from there, sir.
Yeah, so I think about trends in violence in two ways. One, there's what goes on, in particular places at a particular time, and that can be affected by a whole bunch of factors that might be unique to that moment in time, that might be unique to that city. And so, we can come up with a whole bunch of explanations for what's happened over the past few years. So that's the first part of the conversation. That's what most people focus on, right? But the bigger story, the longer-term story here is, why are American neighborhoods so vulnerable to this kind of sharp rise in violence? Why is it that the same neighborhoods over the past 50, 60 years and longer have been the neighborhoods where when a rise in violence hits, it hits in these places, it doesn't hit in these other neighborhoods? And so that's the broader story. And the short version is, we've created this system of extreme inequality in America's urban areas that has left neighborhoods vulnerable to this kind of violence. That's why I say, what we're seeing over the past few years is a change. There's definitely been a shift, but it's part of this longer-term pattern.
I see where we're headed in this hour, and I'm excited to have Dr. Patrick Sharkey on, and I can tell you now I'm going to need every minute in this hour to unpack what he's already laid out. And those are two fundamental questions that we need to wrestle with, particularly for those of us who happen to be persons of color, who find ourselves all too often being the residents in these particular neighborhoods. You heard him say just a moment ago two things. One, why are neighborhoods in this country so vulnerable to these upticks in crime? And secondly, why are the same neighborhoods always impacted by these upticks in crime? A great deal to talk about even beyond those two questions. Just getting started in this hour with Dr. Patrick Sharkey as we talk about the crime spike and why what we're experiencing right now should not be a mystery to all of us. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
Congratulations to Trinity Unlimited Childcare for being KBLA Talk 1580's Office of the Week. Into your business today in the KBLA app or KBLA1580.com for the Office of the Week. Congratulations to Trinity Unlimited Childcare.
Bring in the new year with Ken Williams. He's coming to Ontario in the Toyota Arena December 30th. And in Los Angeles in the Microsoft Theater December 31st.
I don't know what I'm going to do about this light bill. Just hit the blunt one time and see if it don't change your perception of what's important in your life. I don't know what I'm going to do about this life. Them blunts. I got 12 candles. I've been waiting to burn them.
He's back with an all-new show. It's the award-winning comedian, Ken Williams.
Just so you knew they was lying, they said some next that don't even make mathematical sense. They said there's a chicken wing shortage, but we got plenty thighs.
Ken Williams with his special guests, Mark Curry, Tommy Davidson, Tony Roberts, Daphne Springs, and Pretty Ricky. In Ontario, get tickets at Ticketmaster. In Los Angeles at AXS.com. Bring in the new year with Ken Williams.
It's pro time because at Lowe's, it's Provember. Save big with inventory you can count on, like Flex products or DeWalt power tools starting at just $99. Plus, Lowe's MVPs members earn up to 3 times bonus points per dollar on select items. Save all Provember long. Bonus points calculated before taxes and fees after applicable discounts, if any. MVPs Pro Rewards Program. Terms and restrictions apply. See Lowe's.com/L/Pro Loyalty Terms. Subject to change. Prices valid from 10/17/22 to 2/3/23 or until supplies last.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin Ultra Strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Interrogating your assumptions and expanding your inventory of ideas. Let's get back to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to Dr. Patrick Sharkey on KBLA Talk 1580. Our phone number 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. Talking in this hour about this recent spike in crime and why we should not be surprised by it. Dr. Sharkey's already laid the foundation here, and I want to just build on that. He raised 2 powerful questions moments ago. One, why American neighborhoods, certain American neighborhoods to be more exacting, are always subject to these upticks in crime, number one. Number two, why is it that they're the same neighborhoods all the time? Let's jump from there, Dr. Sharkey. Let's take the first question first. Why are certain American neighborhoods always so vulnerable to these upticks in crime, sir?
Well, we got to go back to the 1960s, really, and what happened in the 1960s. Yeah, so urban economies started to change. Okay, manufacturing jobs started to disappear. At the same time, the federal government invested in suburbanization, but they made those investments for white people. Okay, I want to be very explicit. These were race-specific investments that subsidized white outmigration of central cities. Okay, so as the population started to leave central cities and political influence started to move out to suburban areas, federal government's commitment to cities in terms of budget dollars started to dwindle. This is when poverty started to become concentrated in the neighborhoods left behind, neighborhoods that had lost jobs, neighborhoods that had lost political influence, neighborhoods that had lost resources from state and federal governments. When that happened, when poverty started to become concentrated, instead of investing in those neighborhoods, instead of them making the same commitment to those neighborhoods, and let's name them, these are low-income communities of color, okay? Instead of making an investment to bolster those neighborhoods, the federal government and state governments abandoned those communities and instead began to invest in the institutions of punishment. And by that, I mean the police and the prison. The response became, okay, we're going to leave those neighborhoods on their own. And this was explicit. This is, these are in documents from the Nixon administration. We're going to go into a period of benign neglect, they called it. Mm-hmm. We're going to leave those communities on their own, not deal with those problems. Instead, we're going to invest in the police and the prison. And there have been fluctuations since then, but that policy regime, which I refer to as abandonment and punishment, has basically remained intact in the 60 years since, and it's left communities vulnerable to every rise in violence that happens. It's because of disinvestment. It's not an accident.
I hear your issue, that it's disinvestment, excuse me, and not an accident. I'm not naive in asking this question, but what did these communities do to warrant being abandoned and put upon in this way?
Well, so I didn't live through this period. I've just read the history, but if you read the histories of the 1960s, it's a decade where, for a good stretch of that decade, there were efforts. There was a war on poverty. There was a movement for civil rights. There was a real effort to kind of deal with the fundamental injustice that was happening, that was creating all of the unrest, the anger, the resentment that was being expressed in uprisings throughout the 1960s. Okay, so there was an effort to deal with it. That effort was abandoned toward the end of the decade, and this started. You can see it in the speeches of Lyndon Johnson, but in other political representatives, there became this movement to explain what was happening, not as a product of injustice and inequality, but rather as a product of lawlessness, as a product of disorder. And that narrative, that idea that all of the problems that came to be seen as a crisis in the 1960s, the urban crisis of the decade, that came to be explained as a product of lawlessness, disorder, and that led to this response of saying, okay, we're not going to try to deal with this anymore. Instead, we're going to really invest in the police. We're instead going to invest in this regime of mass incarceration, and that's what happened.
That notion of benign neglect, it's an arresting phrase that the Nixon administration used, that there would be benign neglect of these particular communities of color. So it's one thing for Nixon to advance that particular narrative. It's another thing to ask Dr. Sharkey why, to your mind, that narrative has endured all these years. Again, presidents, change directions all the time. Look at what Donald Trump was doing and the direction he was taking us in. Look how Joe Biden had to do a U-turn in that regard. Why, no matter who has been in the White House, has that narrative existed and survived all these years, 60 years later?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to give you an answer that's a little bit counterintuitive.
Okay.
But more and more I've come to think this is the right answer. It's cheaper to do it this way. And so, people look at our system of mass incarceration and intensive policing, and they think, oh, we're spending all this money on this system of punishment. The truth is, this is a system that targets individuals. And so it's expensive for every one of those individuals who gets caught up in the legal system. But for the nation as a whole, this is a whole lot cheaper than actually making the types of investments that can bolster up communities, that can give people economic opportunities, that can create great schools and great learning environments, even in places that have high levels of poverty. So it's actually a much, and this argument is developed in a former student of mine, Adana Usmani, who has written about this brilliantly in my mind, and has made the case that, no, it's actually not more expensive to lock people up because you're doing it one by one. It's a lot more expensive to actually make the investments that could give people opportunities.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that I saw that answer coming, but I receive it and I accept it. That it's sad though. I mean, it messes with the mind to consider that these same neighborhoods have been vulnerable for 60 years. And that narrative of benign neglect and abandonment has endured for all these decades, primarily in a word because it is cheaper. It's just cheaper. The lives of these precious fellow citizens seems not to matter. And so because it's cheaper, this is the path that we've chosen and the path that we've remained on for all these decades now, which raises, though, to my mind, Professor Sharkey, this particular question. Dr. King once famously said, and he's been quoted by many people since then, including yours truly, that budgets are moral documents. Budgets are moral documents. I don't care what you say. Show me your budget, and I can tell very simply and very quickly what your priorities are, who and what matters to you, because your budget is a moral document. If King is right about that, and I suspect that he is, and our option, our choice has been to go the cheap route, what does that say about our democracy?
I think that's exactly right. And the truth is, we have so much evidence that investments in community organizations, in residents, cleaning up abandoned lots, greening abandoned lots, providing high-quality after-school programs, providing summer jobs, providing better street lighting, very basic investments that most neighborhoods across the country take for granted, reduce violence and have an enormous impact on violence. And that comes from the most rigorous evidence you could generate. Okay, this comes from randomized controlled trials. We as a nation have not made the investments that we know work to control violence, that we know can actually not only reduce violence, but also create stronger neighborhoods. We haven't made those investments. And there's a great example. Just today, the Biden administration has been the first administration to actually put some dollars into community approaches against violence. I just read today in a newsletter, the Trace, great news organization that follows these stories very closely. I read today that initiative has ended today. That money has dried up as of today. And it just reflects the fact that this came with great fanfare, and it was a really important statement that they were going to invest in community organizations. but it's a temporary, short-lived, piecemeal investment. And when you contrast that to the investment that cities make in their police departments, that states make in their legal systems over time, it's just such a sharp contrast, and it reveals where the priorities are. It really does.
The problem with this thinking, and by this thinking, I mean that we can contain crime over there. We can contain crime in those neighborhoods. I mean, it is true, as you've already established, that too many neighborhoods in this country are vulnerable to these upticks in violent crime. You've established already, and we'll get more into this in a moment, that it's the same neighborhoods that keep being vulnerable to these upticks in violent crime. But one of the reasons, to my mind, you're the expert here, I'm just a lowly talk show host, but one of the reasons, to my mind, that this narrative has existed for 60 years is because people have bought into this notion that crime can be contained. If we keep it over there and away from us, we don't have to worry about it. And yet, you know, as an expert researcher and professor at Princeton, that crime creeps. Crime creeps. And that's what we saw a couple of years ago with the advent of these smash and grabs during the holiday season. Crime creeps here in Los Angeles, where this radio station is flagshipped, heard across the nation, but flagshipped, of course, here in L.A. The whole country saw the story of Jackie Avant, the wife of one of the major music industry executives, Clarence Avant. I've knew them for years. Clarence, of course, is still living, but I've known the Avants for years, and everybody was just gobsmacked when the wife of this record executive, former president of Motown, was murdered in her home in one of the most exclusive estates in the city of Los Angeles. And then, you know, around that same time in Hancock Park, a very nice neighborhood in this city, a mother and her child, pushing her child in a stroller, they were accosted in the middle of the street, in the middle of at daylight, middle of the day. And so these are stories that don't just exist in L.A. These are stories that exist all across the country. My point here, you obviously take it, is that crime creeps. So what's wrong with this notion of thinking that we can contain crime, contain it in certain spaces?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, when you say that crime creeps, we can model that, you know, in the sense that when there are more guns circulating in space, it changes everyone's behavior. It changes everyone's behavior in that system. It makes everyone more aware. It makes people more likely to, you know, to be or less willing to venture out into public spaces, to leave their kids out in a park to play on their own, to go to a library, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. So this starts a process. When people start to retreat from public space and you know, spend more time at home and they're fearful of going out, that then changes the dynamics in public space and reinforces who's actually out there, who's out there looking out over public space, who's occupying public space. So this cycle of, you know, violence rises, people retreat to their homes, violence starts rising more, and then we turn back to the police. This destroys communities. It destroys entire cities. You know, cities are the basic feature of city life is that it's about public space. It's about shared space and over and above private space. And so that core feature of city life is just completely undermined when cities carry the threat of violence. So, you know, your example just reveals this larger pattern where when we let violence start to rise, it undermines city life, and that extends to every community across cities.
I got two or three things on my mind right now that I want to ask and follow up, but I'm looking at my clock and I see we've got news, traffic, and sports in about 60 seconds. So let me just tee up where I want to go on the other side, and we'll continue our conversation with Princeton's Dr. Patrick Sharkey, an expert on this issue of crime spikes and why we should not be surprised. This is not a mystery. This is no great mystery here, and we're unpacking that in this hour. When we come forward, though, I want to come back to this notion of guns. It is impossible to talk about violent crime in this country without having a conversation about guns. And yet it is, I've said so often in my work and witness that to my mind, racism may very well be the most intractable issue in this country. And I don't want to back off of that point, that racism may be the most intractable issue in this country. But the longer I live, the more I'm rethinking that frame and whether or not guns ought to be at the top of the list. In this country, this issue of guns is an intractable political problem. And I want to get Professor Sharkey's take on why and what, in fact, he thinks we ought to do about guns, because there is no increase in violent crime if there is no increase in access to guns. We're going to have to talk about that. And we haven't really addressed that second question that he raised earlier on. This is a very smart audience, and an audience packed with people of color, African Americans and beyond. And so I think they've already figured this out. But it is that question that vexes all of us. Why? One, are certain communities so vulnerable to these upticks in violent crime? But secondly, and more expressly, why is it that it's the same neighborhoods all the time? Crime doesn't move. It stays in the same spaces. And that's worth unpacking as well. We'll do all that and more when we come forward after News, Traffic, and Sports with Dr. Patrick Sharkey of Princeton on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
The Black Information Network is following breaking news out of Washington, D.C. and over the skies of Russia. Brittany Griner has been released from Russian custody. Here's President Joe Biden.
This is a day we've worked toward for a long time. We never stopped pushing for her release. It took painstaking and intense negotiations, and I want to thank all the hardworking public servants across my administration who worked tirelessly to secure her release.
The president and Brittany's wife, Sherelle, all talked on the phone early this morning. Sherelle says she and the family overwhelmed.
We do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones.
Stay with the Black Information Network. We'll keep you updated on this breaking news story as details become available. I'm Ree Harris on your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network at BINnews.com.
Still seeing this wreck from earlier this morning in Culver City affecting our 405, south side of the 405. This is right around National. Carpool lane, left lane blocked with the crashes. Far back is that 101 coming away from the valley, a very busy drive. East side of the 101, now looks like we have a stalled vehicle as you travel Encino right around Haskell. That is stuck in a center traffic lane and you're tapping the brakes from at least Tampa. Hazard listed on the south side of the 710 around Del Mar Boulevard. Broken down vehicle. It's going to be stuck in the center divider. The 10 west as you get towards that 605, listed a two-car crash onto the right shoulder here.
Hi, I'm Kyle, and my company is Blindster.com. I started Blindster in 2010 to provide custom blinds, shades, and shutters at affordable prices. Our blinds are easy to install and shipping is free. Don't hire an expensive professional. Do it yourself and save big at Blindster.com.
Is this the time?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers didn't have their two best players last night in Toronto and lost. The Clippers had their two best players on the floor in Orlando but lost in overtime. A rough night for both of LA's NBA teams. Without LeBron James and Anthony Davis, the Lakers lose by 13 to the Raptors. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George suited up for the Clippers, but the Magic still won by 5 to snap a 9-game losing streak. The two All-Stars had more turnovers than baskets. The Clippers play at Miami tonight. The Rams and Las Vegas Raiders meet up tonight at SoFi. Rams coach John McVay said he's unsure if quarterback Baker Mayfield will play tonight. Mayfield is taking a crash course in the Rams offense after joining the team on Tuesday. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. This sports report was brought to you by MVP Accident Attorneys. When it comes to your settlement, we're a slam dunk. Call 833-MVP-WINS or check their website at themvp.com for a free case review.
When you're the victim of a car accident, hiring the right law firm can be the difference between a rewarding settlement and striking out. Call the pros at MVP Accident Attorneys at 833-MVP-WINS for your free consultation.
Call on me, your MVP.
KBLA Talk 1580 is pleased to announce a can't-miss community event.
It's a celebration.
Welcome home, Mayor-elect Karen Bass.
Don't ever be kidding me.
On Saturday, December 10th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., join KBLA Talk 1580 in Leimert Park at the intersection of Leimert and Vernon for this free public event as we celebrate Mayor-elect Bass's historic victory. There'll be live performances from Brian McKnight, Wapale, Club Nouveau, and more. There'll be food trucks and a diverse array of vendors along with the attendance and participation from community leaders, elected officials, celebrities, business owners, and other notables. KBLA Talk 1580 will host Mayor-elect Bass on the main stage at 11 a.m. as we reflect on the importance of this moment and what it means for the Black community, women, and all Angelinos who believe in the limitless potential of our amazing city. We look forward to celebrating with Mayor-elect Karen Bass and you, Saturday, December 10th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the intersection of Lamert and Vernon.
It's a celebration.
This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
We gon' celebrate your party with you. Come on, come on.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I know you wanna leave me, but I refuse to let you roll.
Ain't Too Proud is a celebration that brings the audience to its feet.
Ain't too proud to beg, as you know it.
The Grammy-winning songs, the Tony-winning movies. Ain't Too Proud, the life and times of the Temptations. Returning to the Amundsen December 13th. Tickets at AmundsenTheater.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, Maisha Cairo here, KBLA, live at Chase Bank on Crenshaw and Vernon for the In This Together tour with female business owners, a day of empowerment, community panels, and best of all, tips on building business from marketing to capital. I'm here with Lisa Stevens, Senior Business Consultant with Chase for Business. Lisa, what's one tip you'd give to business owners here in the Crenshaw area?
I love that you asked that question. I'm originally from Brooklyn, and I grew up in an area that's very similar to Crenshaw. So this is near and dear to my heart. And if I could only leave a business owner with just one, I would tell the business owner to identify their why. And I think that is so important because your why is going to be that strength on those days where you feel like you're struggling. Your why is going to be that stepping stone. Those days that you want to give up, your why is going to be the reason that you get back up.
And how would you advise business owners looking to acquire capital? What do they need to know before stepping inside the branch to ask for funding?
So 3 things. I do want to share this when it comes to the power of capital and just finding those resources. Understand that capital is a 3-part of a business, right? It's not always about the monetary piece, but if you first put that intellectual, right? What do I need to know? That social, who I need to know, that will help you to then package for that monetary piece. So no matter who you're banking with, you should know your banker. Never walk into a bank and you're transactional only.
It's just like Lisa to drop gems. I'm Maisha Cairo in the community for KBLA with JP Morgan Chase.
Congratulations to Trinity Unlimited Childcare for being KBLA Talk 1580's Office of the Week. Into your business today in the KBLA app or KBLA1580.com for the Office of the Week. Congratulations to Trinity Unlimited Childcare.
If you're a Los Angeles Department of Water and Power residential customer, listen to this. LADWP now offers convenient monthly billing through the new Level Pay program. Level Pay helps you budget for your utility bill with a predictable monthly amount that can also include past due balances. You'll know exactly how much you need to pay each month. Don't wait. Sign up today for Level Pay by calling 1-800-DIAL-DWP. That's 1-800-DIAL-DWP.
Have you been court ordered to take parenting classes? Call 323-804-8469 for a free class. That's 323-804-8469. February 6th, courtesy of Strengthening the Black Village, a nonprofit organization.
Less BS per broadcast. Fewer microaggressions per megawatt. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Tavis Smiley. Glad to have you with us on KBLA Talk 1580. Our phone number 1-800-920-1580. 1-800-920-1580. We are in hour 1 today. Great show lined up for you today, and we kicked it off with a great conversation with Princeton's Dr. Patrick Sharkey, an expert on crime trends in this country, a sociologist, in fact, professor of sociology and public affairs at the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, a leading scholar on urban crime, and I'm delighted to have him in conversation this hour about these crime spikes and why certain neighborhoods in this country are always vulnerable to these increases, these upticks in crime, and why they tend to be the same neighborhoods. As I said before, news, traffic, and sports, Dr. Sharkey, I don't think this audience is going to be surprised at the answer you're about to give me, but let me ask anyway, why, beyond the fact that certain neighborhoods are always vulnerable, why is it that they are always the same neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think the answer is that it's not about the people, it's about the communities, what happens in those communities. And here's what I mean. There's actually really fascinating evidence going way back where researchers were studying which neighborhoods in Chicago were the most violent. And what they found is that the same neighborhoods, even as like the population was shifting, new ethnic groups were moving into the neighborhoods, the population was turning over entirely, the violence persisted in the same community. So they asked why, and that was the basis for kind of 80 subsequent years of research on this question. What they found, and what's still kind of the dominant explanation here, is that when communities have concentrated poverty in the U.S., that then leads to disinvestment. And what that means is that the schools start to function a little bit worse. They're not maintained as well. Public housing developments might not get the maintenance they need, so locks are not maintained. People start to feel less secure, start to stay inside more. Parks change. The environment within public parks starts to change. So people, caregivers aren't using them with their kids. They start to keep away from the parks. A different segment of the population starts to use the parks for their own purposes. Same with libraries, same with other institutions, community centers, and so forth. These sets of processes, which happen when you have the common, it's not just poverty, it's the disinvestment that comes when you have concentrated poverty. These changes mean that people aren't talking to each other. They're not looking out over public space. If you think about that neighbor, everybody's got that neighbor who just looks out on their stoop or out their window, making sure everybody's okay, looking out for, their neighbor's kids and so forth. When there's concentrated poverty, when there's disinvestment, that's less likely to happen. Residents are less likely to know each other, to work together, to step in if there's some kids causing trouble on the corner or in the park. And through all of these processes, when you have concentrated poverty and disinvestment, it makes a neighborhood more vulnerable to violence. And we can show that. We can show that it doesn't matter who lives there. It doesn't matter the racial or ethnic group. It doesn't matter the occupations that people have. That's not what matters. What matters is whether poverty is concentrated and the types of investment and disinvestments that are made in that community.
Speaking of disinvestment, as you were talking, I was thinking in my mind right quick of who and how many Democratic presidents we've had over that 60-year period. And so we start with, just go a little further back, we start with Kennedy, Democrat, we go to Johnson, Democrat, then Nixon shows up. We eventually end up with Jimmy Carter as president. Then we end up with Bill Clinton as president. We end up with Barack Obama as president. Now we've got Joe Biden as president. That's just a quick cursory recall. I may have missed somebody in there, but that you take my point. My point simply is that over this 60-year period, they haven't all been Republican presidents. So they haven't all had to necessarily adopt that Nixonian narrative of benign neglect of these particular communities. What do we know? What's the research tell us about whether or not this disinvestment in these communities over that period, whether that pattern has ever been interrupted? Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. And there have been investments made at particular points in time that I think haven't gotten the credit they deserve. For instance, the Recovery Act in the Obama administration. I was very worried when just at the scale of foreclosures, this is a recipe for violence to rise when neighborhoods are emptying out, when there are abandoned homes, and people are trying to get out of a community. That's a recipe for violence to rise. It didn't happen back in 2008, 2009. This is hard to demonstrate empirically, but my feeling is really that the investment, the $800 billion that was spent in the Recovery Act, propped up neighborhoods and kept them from falling apart. So the larger point is that there have been investments to bolster communities, to create stronger neighborhoods. Those investments are what we need to reduce violence. The problem is just that they've been temporary. Yeah. They've been enacted at a point in time. They haven't been sustained. They haven't been implemented at a scale that can really create transformative change and really deal with the consequences of extreme inequality on a sustainable basis. Yeah. That's been so I refer to it as durable policy. We need durable investments in central city neighborhoods, and we've never had those.
You mentioned Chicago a moment ago, and I want to circle back to that right quick before I move forward, because There's a question I want to give you a chance to respond to as an academic. I can certainly respond to it and address it and have and probably will in the future in the political realm. But I want to ask you how you view this, given the lane that you run in. And that is this notion of everybody always using Chicago as the litmus test. I mean, Chicago is always the example of urban crime. And let me be clear, Chicago has its issues, no doubt about that. But if for whatever reason, again, I'm no naivete here. I want to hear your take on it. But for whatever reason, Chicago is always the favorite choice of folk, particularly on the right, when they want to make an example about crime and urban crime and how bad off America is and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Chicago is always exhibit A. I love Chicago. My friends know it's one of my favorite American cities. Any excuse to go to Chicago, I'm there. Maybe not this time of year, but it's one of my favorite cities in the nation. And yet it's always used as the barometer, as sort of the litmus test, as, again, exhibit A when we talk about crime. It ain't the only city going through what it's going through, but what do you make of the politics specifically of why they always choose Chicago as their example?
That's a great question. And, I worry that I reify this because a lot of my research is based in Chicago, and that's mostly because, my mentors, the people who I trained under in grad school were at Chicago and gathered all their data in Chicago. But you're exactly right. It kind of stands in for the issue of violence in the U.S. Part of that is definitely race.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago has a large black population. Let's not beat around the bush. That's clearly a central reason why Chicago stands in as kind of this symbol, especially to the right. But the other piece of it is Chicago has more murders than any other city in the country. So it's, for its size, it's nowhere near the most violent city in the country. So I'm not, I want to be clear that there are lots of cities that have substantially higher rates of violence. Chicago's nowhere near the most violent city in the country, but in terms of just the raw number, it's got more than any other city. So that makes it kind of stand out. So that's part of the reason. And, I think this is not necessarily always going to be the case. I mean, a couple decades ago, New York was the poster child for violence in the U.S. When there were 2,200 murders every year in New York, everybody looked at that city as kind of the example of the failed American city. Well, this year they're going to be around 400 instead of 2,200. And so people don't think of New York in the same way that they did. So, I think that's part of an answer. But again, I feel a little bit embarrassed talking about this because I reify it a little bit. I've done so much work in Chicago, and I love that city as well. But it just seems to be the focus. Yeah. No,
I appreciate your transparency about that. When we come forward, given the example you just gave now about New York, at its height, at its worst, I should say, there were about 2,200 murders a year. This year, that number's down to 400. That's significant, a significant drop, which leads us into a conversation in a moment about what we've learned about what can in fact control violent crime, never mind the fact it happens in the same neighborhoods all the time that are always vulnerable to these upticks. But what can be done? What have we learned about what can be done to control violent crime? And you can't talk about Chicago, as we were a moment ago, without talking about guns. We'll talk about that as well when we come forward with Dr. Patrick Sharkey on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
The state task force is getting closer to identifying what reparations will look like in California. Maisha Cairo here with your K-Black Minute News, brought to you by CaliforniaBlackMedia.org. The California Task Force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans will be conducting its last meeting of 2022 on December 14th and 15th at Oakland City Hall Chambers, beginning at 9 a.m. with time for public comment. Meetings will be live streamed on the task force website or on ETM Media YouTube. Task Force Chairperson Kamala Moore says that the next meeting is of high importance and will include an in-depth conversation about redress and repair. So far, the task force has determined a conservative estimate of 2 million African Americans in California who have ancestors that were enslaved here in the U.S. They are still determining what or how much compensation should be. Let's start the conversation on social media pages at KBLA 1580.
At the Strategy Center, we have a lot to celebrate. Join us Saturday, December 17th
12 noon to 4 p.m. for our annual holiday block party at Strategy in Seoul, located at 3546 Martin Luther King Boulevard, Los Angeles 90008 on King Boulevard, 1 block east of Crenshaw. Featuring food from Earl's on Crenshaw, Afro-Cuban drumming with Richard Marquez, and ornament making for kids of all ages, and more activities for children. Help us celebrate 33 years of fighting anti-Black policies in LA. We want free public transportation for everyone in LA and 50% of all public and private jobs set aside for Black applicants. Did I mention a live DJ and karaoke? You do not want to miss this. Join us on December 17th from 12 to 4 p.m. at Strategy in Seoul, 3546 West Martin Luther King Boulevard. Visit our website for more information and RSVP to www.thestrategycenter.org.
The Institute for Diversity Certification is all about the 3Ds: dedication, determination, and discipline. Learn more about our globally recognized diversity certification program today by calling 1-800-983-6192. Again, 1-800-983-6192, or visit diversitycertification.org. As the #1 organization for certified diversity professionals and also certified diversity executive credentials, diversitycertification.org will provide an opportunity for you to demonstrate dedication to the field, determination to make progress, and more discipline to your process. Go today and learn more about the diversity certification system. Call 1-800-983-6192. Again, 1-800-983-6192. Or go to diversitycertification.org. That's diversitycertification.org. The standard of excellence, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
Watching my time here, which is getting a little tight on me, Dr. Sharkey. Let me come right quick to this notion of guns. You can't talk about Chicago, as we were a moment ago, without talking about guns. And you can't talk about these crime spikes, these upticks, which, again, should be no mystery if you consider the increase of guns and the access and availability to them. That's my read. What's your take on it?
That's right. And, it's not an accident that in 2020, more people bought guns in the U.S. than in any year in the history of the country before that. And then in 2021, even more people bought guns. So what happened from 2020 to the present is not an overall increase in crime. It's an overall increase in gun crime. Very explicitly. That's the form of crime that rose. Gun violence rose.
What's your research say to you, if it does, about why in the last couple of years we've seen this exponential growth in gun purchases?
Well, thinking back to 2020, we, meaning the whole country, got a very clear message that you're on your own.
Yeah.
Okay. Public institutions shut down, schools shut down, libraries shut down, parks shut down in a lot of places. Workplaces shut down, and the political environment just conveyed the very, very clear message: you're on your own to deal with this. This is not the government's responsibility. We're not going to help you. You're dealing with this on your own. When that happens, when people feel isolated, when they feel like the basic institutions of society are breaking down, they retreat to their homes. They retreat back to their away from public spaces, and in this case, they went out and bought guns on a scale that we haven't seen in the country's history. And so, it was this unique shock, but it has persisted over time. And that's what has played a very big role in contributing to this rise in violence over the past couple of years.
Yep. If Rudy Giuliani were here, and maybe even if Mike Bloomberg were here, they might argue that it was stop and frisk that worked so well in New York. They got that number down from its height of 2,200 murders a year to about 400 this year. I'm not buying that. But what do we know about why New York is handling this issue much better than Chicago, say, or other places?
Yeah, well, New York saw a big rise in violence in 2020 too, so they weren't immune to what happened then. But what I'd say is, in 2011. At the peak of stop and frisk, about 700,000 New Yorkers were being stopped by the police every year, and those are just the documented stops. Okay, when De Blasio came into office, and NYPD's policy of stop and frisk was declared unconstitutional, the police department changed their policy, and the number of stops plummeted went down to less than 50,000. Okay, so the number of stops dropped by 95%. This ended as a central tactic of the NYPD. And what happened? Violence fell to record lows in the following years. It had never been lower. So Bloomberg or Giuliani would have a really hard time explaining that when they ended stop, question, and frisk, violence then fell to the lowest period on record in New York City.
I love it. Our remaining moments with Dr. Patrick Sharkey when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where we turn red lights to green lights and keep it moving.
Central Neighborhood Health Foundation is a full-service network of federally qualified health care centers that serves local communities throughout Los Angeles, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. CNHF clinics provide low-cost to no-cost, compassionate, comprehensive, quality health care, which includes primary care services for chronic disease and diabetes management, pediatric and women's services, preventive care, vision and dental screenings, COVID-19 testing and vaccines, flu vaccines, behavioral health, HIV, and substance use services. Virtual telehealth visits are available from the comfort of your home with highly qualified physicians and medical professionals. CNHF also provides peer support specialist training and help with housing navigation. Central Neighborhood Health Foundation. Your wellness is our priority. Comprehensive care built on trust and respect. For more information, visit cnhfclinics.org or call 213-536-5815 today to locate a clinic near you.
Shoot Your Shot SoCal, a self-service photo booth perfect for all types of events, birthdays, concerts, festivals, weddings, and more. Send images and videos instantly via email and enhance guest experience. Contact Shoot Your Shot on Instagram. They serve Inland Empire, Los Angeles, and Orange County with friendly and reliable staff. We will see you at the next corporate event, taking still photos and boomerangs with Shoot Your Shot SoCal. Go to Instagram today and book your Shoot Your Shot Cal event.
KBLA Talk 1580 invites you to join us in celebrating the season of giving by being part of the solution. As we enjoy great food, family, warmth, and well wishes in whatever our festive tradition may be, we share the beauty of the season by reaching out to the less fortunate. Please help us to help others with the KBLA Cover the Houseless Cozy Community Coat and Blanket Drive. All you have to do is drop off new or clean, gently used winter coats and blankets in the KBLA lobby during business hours, now through December 20th. All of the coats and blankets will be donated to unsheltered individuals and families experiencing houselessness. Simply bring your donation to 4434 Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles, near Vernon Avenue, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. weekdays. That's 4434 Crenshaw in historic Leimert Park. During the holidays and every day, let's remember, we keep us safe. We keep us warm. We are the safety net. And together, we can cover the unsheltered. Get caught up in the spirit of the season, the spirit of love. Make a difference with your friends at KBLA Talk 1580.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Dr. Patrick Sharkey, I've got 2 minutes left in this conversation, which I've enjoyed immensely. Thank you for just empowering us with information that can help us make better choices and hopefully live better lives. In these last 2 minutes, though, we are, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, already in a recession, and everything I'm reading suggests, and the experts I'm talking to confirm for me, they believe that this recession is about to get deeper. What's your take then on these crime spikes as the economy gets ever tighter?
I'm worried about it. So what worries me is that city budgets are going to start to deal with some real problems as federal dollars start to dwindle and state support starts to drop. I'm very worried about how cities will respond to this latest rise in violence, but really the more general question of, how do cities provide the kinds of services and supports for residents that stabilize neighborhoods and that make neighborhoods less vulnerable to violence. I think it's going to be a challenge. I think resources have to come from state governments, and continued resources have to come from the federal government in the coming years if we want to really deal with this issue and make sure violence doesn't rise.
And finally, in 45 seconds, what to your mind would have to happen for policymakers, public policymakers, to advance good public policy that interrupts and completely reframes the narrative we've been operating inside of for the last 60 years?
Yeah, so there's one set of policies that can happen within cities where, programs that have police working with residents to solve local problems. Police can be really effective in reducing violence if they're working with residents. We have really good evidence on that. And then basic investments in institutions like summer jobs programs, after-school programs make a huge difference in reducing violence. But then there's a second set of investments that go beyond a city. This is not a city problem. It's a problem of inequality. And so you need affordable housing programs that expand opportunities outside of central cities for people to get access to areas of opportunity. As long as we have this degree of segregation and inequality in America's urban areas, we're going to have continuously vulnerable neighborhoods. So that's the broader challenge that we have to deal with.
Princeton sociology professor Dr. Patrick Sharkey wrote a powerful piece called "The Crime Spike is Not a Mystery." The crime spike is no mystery, to be exact. It's in the Atlantic magazine. You can find it. And he's the author of a number of texts, including Uneasy Peace, The Great Crime Decline, The Renewal of City Life, and the Next War on Violence. He is, as you can tell, an urban crime scholar. Dr. Sharkey, thanks for your insights, sir. Good to have you on this program. All the best to you, and happy holidays.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
My great honor to have you. Hour 2 of Tavis Smiley, as we talk about why black consciousness poses such a threat to racist power structures on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
The Black Information Network is following breaking news out of the White House and Russia. Reports indicate WNBA star Brittany Griner is out of Russian custody.
She's on her way home after months of being unjustly detained in Russia, held under intolerable circumstances.
Earlier this year, a Russian court upheld Griner's drug